Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Iberian Horse Alliance webinar. We are delighted to have as our special guest speaker, clinician, and author Kerry M. Thomas. Kerry's presentation this evening is titled Be the Bridge, Not the Block, Bridging the Gap Between the Natural Herd Dynamic and the Domesticated World. In this keynote, Kerry will take us inside the mind of the equine athlete, exploring how emotion precedes motion and how every stride truly begins in thought. Drawing on his groundbreaking work in the psychology of performance, he'll introduce the core principles of herd dynamic profiling and sensory soundness, and share why nurturing individual herd dynamic, group herd dynamic, and independent nature is essential for developing emotionally complete, high-level equine performers. Kerry, we're so grateful you're joining us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Excuse me. And yeah, I appreciate being here. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you guys. And yeah, I mean, for me, there's a lot to my work. So I'll just give you a little bit of a synopsis of the background and where I am today and how I got here. So a long time ago, I'm going to date myself, but I was talking earlier about my travel out west. Well, that travel trip out west had changed my life in many ways. And long story short, I fell in love with the Wyoming, Montana area, and I ended up spending the better portion of my early life there as far as going back and forth from Pennsylvania to California, but I always ended up back in Wyoming and Montana in the area. And I cut my teeth doing independent field research. I fancied myself, when you're young, you know everything, and you're just going to like, oh, I'm going to be, a wildlife researcher. And sure, okay. But I started to do independent studies I was based in Lovell, Wyoming, and I'm sure some of you, Adam probably knows that town, Lovell, Wyoming, and my cousin and family lived in Jackson, so that was my fly-into space. But then I would travel over the Togody Pass into Cody and up around and get up to Lovell. And I was fascinated with the Spanish Mustangs up there, the prior Mustangs up in that area, and the Bighorn Range, and just over the border in Montana. And for several years, I was doing some interesting, what I thought was very interesting research on predator-prey interactions, studying the interactions between the predators that were there, the prey animals that were there, especially the herd animals, the bison, the elk, and oh, by the way, there were horse herds there. And I was like, what? It really surprised me to see these free range, free roaming Mustangs up in that area. And that's fascinated me. So I switched my focus heavily to horses. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, and so I'm in a horse, and I'm here now, and I'm in a horse-centric community. I'm about 10 minutes away from New Bolton Center, and where I'm at here. So around this area, we have everything from thoroughbred racing to the eventing to the 100 jumpers, pretty much every discipline and everything that you can imagine. And I have plenty of Amish neighbors as well. So we was always around horses, but I wasn't raised with horses. And if you would have told me in high school that I would have a career at 57, I would have what ended up being a lifelong career working in the horse industry, I would have probably told you were crazy because so point of fact, I was never taught how the industry was. I was never taught what a horse was like, how to act around a horse, how to evaluate a horse, and I was taught nothing. And spending my time studying up in those mountains, studying the horses, having a chance to study worldwide from the Brumbies to in Australia in the snowy mountains. That independent field study really changed my whole perspective because I spent 20 years doing that, 20 years plus doing that. And I learned from Mother Nature. I learned from trying to avoid being killed from the environment. I'm a country boy, but going out west was a whole different ballgame. You think you're a country boy, you think you're hard knocking until you spend a few nights, up at 3,000 or 4,000 feet elevation, and you're like, coyote, the hell is that? It was like, wait a minute, there's mountain lions someplace around here. There's grizzly bears, there's black bears, and it changes your whole perspective. And those moments that I began to really hyper focus on herd structure, the communication between the horses and their environment. I was really hyper focused on the predator prey interaction. I was fascinated by the fact that here's these large animals, and what is it about their nature that allows them to live in these spaces, in these open spaces? What is the psychological matrix between the herd structure? And then of course you have your bachelor herds. So that's a whole different dynamic, in nature. And I immersed myself in that for so long. And always an interesting side piece to that is I'm colorblind. So I didn't have any way to determine the horse herds of their phenotypes, the individuals. I only could focus on them for who they were and not what they were. And I didn't know any different. I thought this is just how you did it. Again, I had no one teach me. And I always say you learn the most from the mistakes that you make along the way, because certainly made many of those. And I still make them. That's just the way life is. But that's okay. We pick up our hat and we keep on going forward. But my focus really studied on the behavioral aspects, what I determined called the herd dynamics, the herd structure, the intercommunication, the hierarchy, and studied a lot of the hierarchy and the interrelationships between the horses, how that worked, what that meant. And then studying, of course, the bachelor herd, which is a very interesting dynamic, studying that. And it really changed my focus because I realized that, they rely upon emotional camouflage, the unseen. I don't want you to see me in plain sight, especially the hierarchy. The hierarchy, nature has to conceal her leadership. And there's a reason that she does that, because you can lose the tail of the snake, but not the head of the snake kind of theory. So as the structure goes, the further down in the totem pole that you go, the louder the horses are, and they have the most insecurities. But that wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to find out why that was, what was causing that, what was the difference between purposeful movement and reactive movement, and how did stress carry over? How long did it last? What were the markers of that? How did it affect their interrelationships? And how did they, assimilate to the environment? Assimilation, I discovered, is a psychological part, and adaptation is the physical part. So the physical body adapts to the environment, it adapts to training, it adapts to the things that we present for it. So that's physical training in our modern world, in our domesticated world. But the psychology precedes that. Mental psychological assimilation to environmental changes precedes physical adaptation. And that happens in nature. It is what allows horses to have normal psychological growth patterns, to have the life skills that they need to manage changing environments, to handle stress, and to learn to what I call outsourcing to each other. Be able to, if I don't have the answer, one of my mates is going to have the answer. I'm going to make sure I'm in a matrix. Horses communicate, they're designed to communicate in a matrix. They're not designed to have all the answers themselves. If they would, they may be a mountain lion, or that lone coyote out there rolling around. But they really operate best when they're in a functioning herd structure. And in nature, they have the luxury of having, it's like you say, we can pick our friends, but not our family, type of cliche that we use in human terms. In horses, they do that. They pick their mates when they're left to their own devices, because they don't have fences to corral them in. They have rivers and things like that, but they don't have. And of course, the bighorn has quite the steep sides to it in a lot of places. And I've seen just a little side note, seeing the sheep stand on those cliffs is really breathtaking. Adam here, you may have probably seen some of that out there in Wyoming. But point of fact is, I realized, early on my research, I didn't have terminology for what I was seeing. So I basically made up my own lexicon of terms to make it make sense for me. I'm a scribbler, so I would carry around, I'm a notebook kind of person. I want to write things down. I'm still that way. Everything I do, I write in hand first, because I'm a mind to hand thinker. And my handwriting is not very good because usually my mind works faster than my hand can write. So I have my own version of hieroglyphics, as they say. So the running joke was when I do a lot of horse sales is that someone could find my notebook of the horses and never understand who was on it because they couldn't read my chicken scratch. And so like, that's perfect. Because I know what it is, but along the way, I created my own. Basically, I have a full glossary now, and I've worked on that over the years and just kept adding to it. And on the website in the learning library, there's a glossary of terminology, and there's the bulk of it is there. Not all of it is there because I don't have the time to write a Webster dictionary, but the core things are there that of my work, in that. And it really helped me along the way in my research studying in natural world is to give it a language, because really the information is there in front of us. Our job I thought that my job was to learn how to translate that, how to interpret that, because Mother Nature provides us with the truth, with the answers. Everything is in front of us, but we just have to learn have to unlearn how to communicate so we can learn how to communicate. Understanding that it is not what you see. Your eyes can fool you. You have to go. Nature has a rhythm. Nature has an emotional cadence to it. It's an ebb and flow. And I realized very early on that horses seek two things for their lives. They desire harmony in their environment and contentment with their peers. That is the grade A, top notch, everything that a horse desires. And if we work to provide harmony and contentment, then we're doing our horses a great service, because even though they're not in nature, our job is to bridge that gap. I always say bridging the gap between the natural herd dynamics and the domesticated world is, for me, no matter what I'm doing, that really is my primary job. It's not even a job. It's my passion. It is something, it is what I've dedicated my life to doing. And I spent the bulk of the first 25 years of doing independent research not knowing a dang thing about what I was doing, because there was no protocol. I didn't have a textbook. I didn't have a classroom. My classroom was Mother Nature, and folks who have camped out there realize that, you learn straight away that you're not going to eat where you sleep, and you're certainly not going to use the latrine where you sleep. And staying out there, you need to put a lot of space, in between, and immersing myself in that natural environment. I felt like Grizzly Adams at some points in time, staying out there. I'm dating myself now with the with the TV show when I was a kid. But it really is, it is life, it is changing, and I always felt that in order to truly understand a species, you must immerse yourself within the environments in which they're designed to live in. Because how can I pretend to understand or be so pretentious that I understand the horse's sensory system and communication dynamics and herd structure if I've never been in the environment in which they're designed to live? They weren't born created, in evolution in our backyard, in the pasture down the street, and so they come with a whole different set of natural laws, and I call them the laws of nature. And so these laws of nature, they're not erased in domestication, but yet we can find ways to help bridge that and help fulfill that, within those things. Before I even go any further, because I'm the kind of person that once I get started, I'll just ramble and I'll ramble and I'll ramble and I'll go here and I'll go here. So if anybody has a question, feel free to chime in, or let me know about that. But so I discovered a lot of different things along the way, and we won't get them all in this webinar. But there's something within the herd. I'll start with the herd dynamic and the herd structure. Something that was the biggest breakthrough for me was realizing that there are two different parts of the quote unquote horse psychology at play. And let's call it the female psychology, the female behavior patterns are split into in a different way than the male behavior patterns are. Now we know that it's pretty common knowledge, but for horses, They have a group dynamic, and I call it the GHD. So for me, again, this is my terminology that I created, so we're stuck with it. Sorry, but it's the group herd dynamic. So it's GHD, and then the individual herd dynamic, or the IHD. And so the group dynamic. So every female psychology in nature is, now these are general numbers, but by and large, I use these for it's nice and neat. 75% of the female psyche is based in the group dynamic, and 25% is in the individual dynamic. And that is because of their role in nature. And the males are flipped. The male psychology is 75%, and I'm sure you ladies can agree with this, 75% single focus targets, very linear, and 25% group. Occasionally I care, but it is designed that way. But 75 and 25 make a whole. Together, they make a whole, essentially, that helps protect and govern and manage the herd structure. And so the group dynamic is in charge of multitasking. It is the communication hub. It is where, I need to know what's happening here, here, and here simultaneously, and also be able to determine what could be coming. And so it's a very multitasking thing. It's not linear. It's certainly broad based. It's a scanning thing around. So the group dynamic determines how horses communicate. It handles spatial awareness. Where am I in relation to things in the environment? Individual dynamic handles self-awareness. Where am I in relation to you? So those two things are split in that way. The male psychology is heavily shifted to the IHD because they have their primary role in nature. They have two things they need to do. I need to protect the herd, and I need to find a mate. So I'm very linear in my thinking. I'm very linear in my natural tendencies. I'm a point to point to point. And these are very important things to remember when we're training horses and when we're working with horses, because I work a lot in all different industries. Now I work in every industry, and there's a reason why I work in every industry, from racing to eventing to whatever the case is, because if there's a horse there, I feel like I need to be there. If the horses are in the discipline, I want to be in the discipline. I want to speak for that sounds a little bit, conceited, but I want to speak for the horses. I feel a responsibility to get in there and be in the trenches of every discipline so that I can help, bridge that gap for the horses that are there. But male psychology, coaching and developing a male mind is different, especially in the younger ages. We don't want to ask these horses to multitask. You want to ask them, you can ask them to task sequentially, but multitasking is not, it could potentially frazzle my mind. And I need to go straight forward into different things. You can turn, but always have a point to go to, if you're working with the boys. You need to have a purpose to it. What am I doing? Where are we going? We're working with young fillies on the natural herd dynamic basis, is they work better having multiple things to deal with while having a point, right? So they need to have multiple things to do, not necessarily physically, but psychologically. It's okay to have different things happening in the environment while you're working the fillies and mares. Now, in breeding, in our domesticated world, we've definitely interrupted these normal ratios by our breeding practices, because we breed for specific tendencies. We breed for specific things to meet a discipline, and we'll have to have a whole other breeding seminar sometime, because I'll go off on that and I won't turn around from it. That's a trail you can't get me back from for a while. So, but we have disrupted quite often, to the detriment of the horse in many ways, the natural breeding, by not employing natural breeding dynamics into the equation. Nature's breeding program, by breeding by what we want. And we're in the industry, we have too many horses, right? We breed 50 horses to get one athlete. It doesn't have to be that way. There's other ways to do it by incorporating the psychology before the physical horse. Any questions on IHD, GHD? Because there's a lot there, and each one of these things I'm talking about is when I'm giving a clinic over the weekend, or a week long series of seminars. They take up, they're each an hour long, 2 hour long focus point. But I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here tonight for our first chat together. So anything on that? Do you have any questions on that? Anything that anyone wants to ask about the IHD, GHD?
We have hours to listen to you, so don't worry about it. You just keep on talking, buddy. You'll get all the questions at the end. Where everybody's writing them down, I
Oh,
guarantee you.
well, Bruce,
I,
I have a hard stop at 8:30, so I
Oh, well,
I
you
do
got to
have a
cancel that.
I do have a quick question. In those two dynamics, I assume that it's very different with just the bachelor group versus the other one.
yes. Yeah, there are a wide variety of variations, and to that point, so if you herd structure, in nature, it's like it's linear. You know what I mean? There's a top and bottom to it. There's a hierarchy, and it goes down through, and so each level. This is where we get into sensory soundness. So the other big, this is one of my favorite topics ever because it was lurking in the background of my work for years and years and years, and I just couldn't figure it out. I was missing something for so long, and it was just gnawing away at me, and I couldn't understand, why certain things were happening, why certain horses carried stress differently than others. Mating, breeding, why did you pick this horse, in nature? Why did you go to this one? Things like that. And I began to realize that the hierarchy is knitted together not by a horse's strengths, but by their vulnerabilities. So a horse's vulnerabilities is the tensile strength of the herd because that creates a need. That is the binding emotional fabric to herd structure. And in nature, herd and it also allows some horses to break away, and find other herds, things of that nature. But when the pile gets too heavy, because they don't want, in nature, horse herds are not going to be massive. They're just not. First of all, the environment doesn't allow for it, and in nature doesn't necessarily allow for it either. The numbers can vary, obviously, but you're not going to see. I go and look at horses all around the world in someone's pasture, and there's 15, 20 horses sometimes out in the pasture, and you're like, hey, would you come and look at my herd? I'm like, I'd love to. Absolutely. Come over there, and I'm up against the fence and now I'm looking out, and they're telling me about their herd of horses, and I'm like, well, you actually have 5 different herds in here because it is not the physical number of horses that make up a herd. It is the emotional connection between them that makes up the herd. And that's really important because it is the emotional connection then that we have with our horses that either has us a part of that herd or not a part of that herd. And that is really important. It's not the physical things that we do. Physical is a secondary thing to emotion. Horses operate on emotional intention first, physical action second. We tend to train horses physical action first and ask for forgiveness later. And that's not necessarily that doesn't fit the natural herd, the natural laws of nature, as I like to call it. But it is the vulnerabilities, and once I realized that, okay, it makes sense that the vulnerabilities are the tensile strength of the herd. What makes them vulnerable? What is it about their psychology? What is it about their characteristics, their individual characteristics, and then the characteristics of the herd itself that has the strengths and the vulnerabilities at play? I begin to realize that, well, it is the sensory system. How sensory sound. We all know how physically sound. We know what we're used to that term, physical soundness. But what is a sensory soundness? Well, sensory soundness is I call it sensory soundness because it's the same. It's the first cousin to physical soundness. If a horse is physically sound, if they're sensory sound, the operating system is functioning very well. But very few horses in nature are fully sensory sound. And what that means is they have a 6-step sensory process that they go through constantly. You know, horses are always on survey. Whoop, whoop, whoop. You know, it's that airport radar. It's always going around. And so the first step is they must survey. So they're surveying the environment. And after the survey, it goes into orientation. I have to orient myself. Orientation then feeds into absorbing or absorbing. It goes into no identify, absorb. Wait a minute. Told you I had a long day. It's survey, orient, identify, and then after they identify something in the environment, they start to do that spatial awareness, right? It starts to kick into from the physical world to the psychological part of the horse. It begins to absorb it, right? Once it starts to have intake, it goes into the psychology. This is where things change. This is where the physical world becomes emotional. This is where associations help determine what's going on, or other horses. This is where if I can't figure it out, I'm going to outsource. So absorption turns into then interpretation. So that is where when it goes into full interpretation mode, this is when it's all in here now. And I have to interpret what's going on so I can determine how I'm supposed to act. How am I supposed to express myself from that? Is it going to be a nervous reaction? Is it going to be a purposeful motion? Right? And that determines everything. If we're getting reactions from our horses, the sensory sequence has been disrupted. And when the sensory sequence is disrupted, well, in nature, they have a catch-all. I have my matrix. You know, I'm part of that jigsaw puzzle. I'm one puzzle piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And so my mates help me fit. So my vulnerabilities are not exposed. The most frightening thing for a herd animal is the sense of isolation, the sense of exposure. When that emotional camouflage is ripped off, and now you're taking all these vulnerabilities I have, and now they're exposed. So guess what? That's going to cause a tremendous amount of stress. It's going to cause a lot of reactive behavior patterns and not purposeful responses. And that's really a terrifying place for a horse to be. And that's when very often horses are controlled, or we use tools, we use equipment to help manage this, right? But it's not, we're using physical tools to manage an emotional issue. It's not going to work. It's not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable. And so that's where we have to back up the truck and say, well, what is happening with this, sensory sequence? Where is my missing? And to understand what that means, we have to understand what the job of the sensory system actually is. First of all, I call it the operating system running the machine. It is the operating system, the sensory system. And its job is pretty simple, in point of fact. The sensory system's job is to clear space for the body to move through. I need to clear the space around me. What is happening around me? Where is my cushion? How much cushion do I have between myself and this perceived thing, or this thing that I'm seeing, right? So there's a space there. But I call it like in movement, it is like a blocker in football. So the running back has the ball, and he's got a blocker that busts a hole through the line, and he has a space to run through. Well, the horse's sensory system is that blocker. So the horse is here. The sensory system needs to be at least two lengths further away. So it's an interpretive ratio. So the sensory system should be operating fast enough, efficiently enough to clear space at minimum of 2 times faster than physical motion at any motion that it is. So if a horse is walking, the sensory system needs to clear space. High-level athletes, really good athletes, clear space 3 to 1 relative to physical motion. Elite athletes are 4 to 1. So they're clearing, their sensory system is operating, it keeps pace. However fast I'm going, my sensory system is going to speed up accordingly and just smoothly clear space. It's like driving a Mustang, and you're just, you're hitting the throttle, but you always have good control of the car. Sometimes the faster you go, the more control you have. That's when you begin to feel the athleticism come out at a higher rate of speed. But that's the job of the sensory system. But the trick is very few horses, can complete that sequence on their own. So they oftentimes need assistance. They can get stuck on things. They can get stuck on something. And if we ask a horse to, oh, let me go back to that because it's really important to realize that it's the rate of motion of the horse, but also the rate of motion of the environment. So if a horse can be standing still and you can walk up to a horse fast and they'll go like this, sometimes they'll be like, what? You've approached too fast. So their sensory system was not processing fast enough to clear the space at your rate of speed. So just imagine if you're riding a horse and you're going, even if you're just at a trot, or say you're at even a low canter, and something all of a sudden comes at you or out this way or something like that. If their sensory system is not fast enough, they're going to have a negative reaction to that. It's going to be a nervous reaction, like, oh, what the heck was that? And it can be any number of things. They'll stand still, they'll bolt, anything can happen. Or what the classic is though, you're going along and you begin to feel the stress building up, stress building up, stress building up. And after a while, the balloon, so there's only so much room in that balloon for the air before we have to. I always like when I'm working with giving lessons, I always liken it to like a teapot. So when you're training and coaching, you want to bring it to, you want to elevate it to maybe like a soft boil, but you don't want it to whistle because if it starts to whistle, it's too hot. Like things are happening too much, and now we're putting too much pressure. And there's a fine line between training and trauma. This is something that I deal with in every discipline I work with. I do programs for 5-star eventers. I have horses in the Kentucky Derby. Like for the last 14 years, I evaluated the full Kentucky Derby field. And we put that information out that the past 14 years is actually on our website. You can find that. I'm not sure where my wife has it hidden on our website, but it's on there someplace. I don't do the website, so that's my wife, Daphne, which she's pretty awesome. But she puts up with me, let's put it that way. So, but I'm looking for, when I'm evaluating horses for athletes, I'm looking at their interpretive ratio and how long they have before we have to have an intervention. Because I'll give you an example, like stress builds up, it's going to build up. And we have to know what's the duration of time that we have, which is predicated upon how efficient the sensory system is, which is predicated upon how well we work with the horses, how well we bridge the gap. If you're riding your horse and, horses need our assistance, they need us to help clear the space. They don't need us looking down at them and being completely worried about where you are, because their job is to know where I am in the moment and the next moment. Our job is to worry about the moments ahead and the world at large, beyond where they can interpret. That's our job, to help clear the bigger space. When we do that, we create a bigger cushion, for the horse to work within. The cushion is the horse's mental workspace. So that's where that's where you train. Outside the cushion is where you cause associative trauma with your training. So now you're not training. And there's a threshold in there that we have to find. And my work really involves a lot of determining what those thresholds are, how to work within them without going past them, and really giving a person a full analysis of their horse's behavior and their sensory efficiency, that they have an operator's manual, an owner's manual, and a relationship guide for their horse. And that's kind of how I like to sum it up. And when I'm explaining to people what you're going to get. But, that is really important, understanding that how stress is being not just carried over with your horse, but how it is being processed, and where we can help them process that. How long every horse has a duration of time that they can focus and be fully athletic and fully purposeful before they need a mental break within that training and within that coaching standard. And it may just be as simple as a turn to a different approach. There's all kinds of things that we do in a training program to let the steam out of the teapot before it whistles on its own, and to find those thresholds. It can be something really simple. It can be something that we need to do in a dramatic way. Like when I'm looking at the Kentucky Derby field. I'll give you the cross country course. I was going to give you that one first, but I'll do the Kentucky Derby since we're on the threshold of the Kentucky Derby. So when I'm evaluating the horses and I'm looking at the runners, I'm not worrying about, I'm not looking about the horses that were quote unquote bred for distance and physical this and physical that. Like, yes, I can train a horse, to adapt physically to run a mile and a quarter. But so they call it the fastest 2 minutes in racing. Well, so how many seconds within those 120 seconds can the horse actually compete? There's a difference between movement and being able to compete. Very few horses, I've never met any that can sustain a competitive aspect for 120 seconds, at that rate of speed, in the Kentucky Derby. So they do it in chunks. We're talking about at a high rate of speed and a lot of tension, a lot of intensity. And so there's a period of time that they have that's optimal for that. And then there's a period of time where you have to back off and just let mental momentum take over. So when I'm looking at the horses, I determine, well, so-and-so horse can compete for a duration of time of 40 seconds before there needs to be a mental intervention. So-and-so horse can compete at 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 60 seconds. And that information, and I help trainers, I say, look, this is how much time that you have to work with. So you need to pick your positions and when you're going to turn the horse, loose on that, because he's only going to do it for so long before he's going to just hang. Boop, I hit my wall. That's it. This is enough. So it's all about timing, and it goes into the strategy and all those types of things. When I'm working with cross-country horses, cross-country like in eventing, I do a lot of work in Australia with that, and Western Australia especially. But it's all about, on that cross-country course, where in that cross-country course do we need to give the horse a mental break so that they remain optimized? They can't optimize physical talent if you don't have it here. It's simple as that. If you don't have it here, I don't care how physically well-bred you are. I don't care how physically fit you are. It's just like, I always say, an example for myself, when I'm not a trained speaker, so this is something that's always new for me. And I'm but you can prepare yourself to you're blue in the face, but there's a difference between preparation and execution, right? So you can practice and practice and practice. But when you go out there and it's like playing baseball, and it's like, well, in the batting cage or in practice, I could get up there and man, I could knock them out, And then all of a sudden, I go out there and it's the ninth inning, and there's a crowd, and the bases are loaded, and we're down by 2 runs, and it's up to me. It's like, do you hyperventilate? Do you treat every moment the same? Right? How does the environmental pressures change you? Does it affect you? How do you handle that? Right? So, and what do you need to cope? Right? What are our coping mechanisms under stress? Horses will have them too. And so there's going to be something in there that we have to find. And so those are an important factor to understand as far as finding those thresholds, finding those durations, So, or like when I'm working with eventing horses and we have 3/4 of the cross-country course, everything was great. And so we get to the last couple of jumps and almost to the last jump, and I was doing so good. I had my time, did all the clean jumps, and all of a sudden we come up to this last jump, and she's like, bam, nope. And it's like, whoop. Hey, what are you doing down there? or like hit the brakes, like, holy crap, it's like, what is going on? And so I have people, I do a lot of online coaching and in-person coaching when it comes to this kind of thing. And I'll get videos sent to me and they'll send me invariably the moment, where the horse refused to jump. And I'm like, well, okay, that's all well and good, but that's not the problem. That jump is not the problem. If the jump was the problem, the first jump would have been the problem, right? It's everything that happened leading into this moment. So it's everything that happened leading up to that moment. So that you basically, I explain it as if so when I was a kid, we always had big gardens, raised in the country. My dad had a big garden. And as a kid, you just hated to go out and work in the garden. It's like, oh my gosh, boy, get out there and pick those weeds, And so, okay, but he would do these long rows of potatoes. And and looking back on it, it's funny. My dad has passed away a long time ago, and so but he'll like me using his example as a teaching lesson because I remember, putting potatoes in the sack, and I always said, "Well, Dad, how would I know, you know, when I have to unload this thing?" He goes, "When it gets too heavy, don't let it break." You know, so that's when I knew it was time to empty the tank, basically the sack. Well, stress for horses, potatoes are like little stress balls. So as the horse is moving through the environment, and if it's moving by itself, especially, or moving with a mate that's really not a good buffer, and we'll talk about that in a second, stress will accumulate. So it's like, well, stress ball, stress ball, stress ball, stress ball. After a while, it starts to get a little heavy. And as you go along, the horse's cadence begins to change, right? They become a little more hypersensitive to the environment. Stress is beginning to accumulate. So stress carries over. In nature, the carryover is mitigated because of the structure. I'm in a matrix. So I have assistance with all these different things. When you're asking an animal that is designed to operate in a herd structure, in a psychological and communicated matrix, and you're asking them to work devoid of that, you're putting a lot of pressure on a horse. We're asking a lot of them psychologically. They assimilate so well that they allow us to become complacent and apathetic to the fact that, well, you did this yesterday, right? Why can't you do it today? And well, it's a whole different thing. So stress begins to build, and it is our job to understand where we need to offer them assistance, where we need to offer them an intervention, if you will. There used to be a show called Intervention, I think. I don't know if it's still out there, but this is my own form of intervention for the horse's psychology. And so knowing where that is allows you to have a reset, right? It allows the horse to reset the sensory system and start fresh, mentally fresh, because mental fatigue will compromise physical talent all the time. You cannot stop it, right? You can stop it, but I mean, what I'm saying is mental fatigue is more detrimental to performance and our relationships with horses than anything physical fatigue. So yes, mental fatigue will take a high level athlete and keep them, subpar in performance because they mentally fatigue. And we need to know where that threshold is so that we can, diffuse that. We need to diffuse that. And these are all based upon the natural herd dynamics. Like for me, every single thing I do is predicated upon all the work I've done, in nature and taking this and fitting in here. Yeah, we have a lot of time, right? Like Bruce was saying, we had a lot of time. For me, it was really a hard road to transition from being a researcher and studying, horses in that way to coming into the domesticated world. But I love sports. My brother played for the Atlanta Braves when I was growing up, so he was a great baseball player. So I was around professional athletes growing up. And I learned early on, watching my brother play and just being around these athletes like, Tommy Glavine, Ronnie Gant, John Smoltz, people like that, athletes like that. Sorry, I'm always on call for my mom because, like I said, she's disabled, so I'm her caregiver. So I always have to, if I get a beep, I have to make sure she's okay. Sorry about that. But mom first, sorry. But I learned early on that I had a pro coach tell me one time. He said, "Now look out here and look at all these athletes in spring training. Why do you think that the difference is between the ones that'll make it to the big leagues and the ones that'll stay in the minor leagues?" And I always say, well, I was thinking about the physical talent. And they said, no. All these athletes have very similar physical talent levels. They have access to the same nutrition, the same workout, the same coaches, all these different things. He goes, what determines it is right here, right? And what elevates your game right here? What allows you to perform? It's right here. You can be an average. So like, it's the same thing with horses. So you can have a moderately average physical athlete horse, breeding wise. That matters, but it doesn't matter as much as some people think. If you don't have the mental aptitude to optimize that, it doesn't matter. But at the same time, if you have the mental aptitude of a high level, high functioning sensory system, high level athlete, and you're at the upper echelon of the herd structure, the higher you go on the herd structure, the less vulnerabilities you have, which means the more efficiency you have in your sensory system. The elite horses have complete sensory systems. They don't actually need any kind of buffers. They're comfortable. They like them. But they can survive without them, and they don't choose to. But isolated, they still can operate as if they were in herd structure. The lower you go on the totem pole, now the more vulnerabilities we have. Does not mean that horses lower on the herd dynamic totem pole cannot become great athletes. Most of the horses in the world today, and in any given time, or 75% of them fall in the middle to low level range, because there has to be the bulk of the herd. That's the masses of the horses, and then as higher you go on emotional intelligence increases, and the sensory soundness increases, but the number of horses decreases. So the percentages are much different. So, I had all this information, and when I started to go transition from, it's like, I'm going to go working, and find racehorses. I'm going to take all this information, and I'm going to go to a horse sale, and I'm going to help people find horses. And I'm like, oh my gosh! When I started looking, when I went from nature to the pasture, if you will, I saw aberrations I've never seen before. I saw behavior patterns. I saw tendencies. I saw expressions that I didn't understand, at first. But I was like, well, okay, it didn't magically change. There's something causing all this. There's reasons that this is happening. So you go back upstream to your work, and you start to bridge that gap. And I became very determined to, I could have taken what I dubbed the easy road and just say, I'm not going to mess with, domestication and sports and all this stuff, because, just when you put humans and money together, ethics goes out the window more often than not. And then the horses get lost in the shuffle sometimes, and things happen. And it's like every industry has its good and every industry has its ugly. I mean, it's as simple as that. And we're very industry and discipline biased often, because if it's my industry, I tend to see the ugly in other industries and other disciplines more than our own. I pick on the family across the street, but I have a cousin who acts the same way, but I never talk about them, kind of scenario. But in reality, there's a lot of really good people in every discipline. A lot of really good people who are well-meaning, try and do the right thing, love their horses, and it's always just a few bad things that make the whole industry seem to have a bad rap sometimes, and that's really unfair. And I realized for me, it's like, what, my duty, my personal passion, my drive, whether I spend my life completely penniless or not, is to be in the trenches for the horses. And if I can immerse myself and learn everything I can about the different disciplines and how I can help them bridge the gap between the natural dynamics, the operating system running the machine, what's actually happening, and how you can work with that and still turn a profit and still reach your goals and still achieve your goals. You may have to rethink some things. You may have to look at things. You may have to take a view from the hoof, I like to say. But for me, I find it my personal duty as a person who spent his life now studying horses to be in these trenches, to learn everything I can about these different disciplines. What did they need? What did they require? Because I began to realize that I could match a horse's psychology to fit the discipline. I could match the horse's psychology and sensory efficiency to match the person's, ability. Because there are different disciplines that require different sensory demands. Show jumping requires certain sensory demands. I can have vulnerabilities on some things. I need dedicated strengths in certain things. Racing is the other way. Dressage is something else. Barrel racing is something else. They all intermingle, but every unique discipline brings forth in its own unique demands on the sensory system. And so I'm like, well, okay, I can help you find a horse that's going to, give you potential to reach your goals, and the horse is not going to be put into a place where they don't belong if they naturally match what's naturally going to be asked of them. So my whole thing is that a horse should go where they fit and not be asked to fit into where they're going, right? So if I can determine that, guess what? I can help you. I can help your program. If it's all about dollars and cents for you, I can help you earn more dollars and cents by helping you not select, not bring in the wrong horses to your program. So let's not buy 50 horses. Let's buy 5 of the right horses, right? The ones that fit, the ones that will enjoy what you're going to ask them to do. Because there's nothing worse than, for me, it's like, well, my responsibility to the horses is I want to make sure that said horse can psychologically handle the demands that you're going to ask of it to even become the athlete. Forget about the performance. I want to make sure that they can handle the things that are going to be asked of them in the in-between spaces to even get there, right? Because it's not going to matter if they can't. And some horses can, some horses can't. And it depends on the discipline. It's like just because you're a thoroughbred doesn't mean you're going to be a great racehorse. There are a lot of thoroughbreds who like to jump. I mean, it's a whole. We can breed them for certain things, but personality, if you will, behavioral genetics, or something different. Sensory strengths and vulnerabilities are something entirely different, and those things must match. And so I have dedicated myself now to, for the second half of my career, I guess you'd say, to being immersed in the different disciplines. I started in racing, and started with nothing. With nothing. I mean, I really just decided to risk everything to learn all I could about this because I wanted to help the horses. And so I always track my career. I had an apartment in Lexington, Kentucky with no furniture. A little bit of time went by. I mean, I slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. And I remember it was a joke because a little bit of time went by and I made enough money and I went to Walmart and I bought one of those things you sleep on when you're camping. I'll put it on the floor. It's like, oh, I'm moving up in the world. I got that. A little while later, I got a floor mattress. And then a little while later, one of the clients sent me a king size bed. So I thought, I made it. And to this day, that king size bed I moved that thing from Kentucky all the way up here to Pennsylvania because it's like a personal trophy of mine that's a little side story, but that's a story for a glass of wine one night, you guys. We'll talk about that. But I was perfectly willing. For me, I'm perfectly willing, and I'm always have been to risk everything I have to learn something so I can help, because I feel like that's what I'm meant to do. Like I didn't learn all these things. I didn't risk my life in Wyoming, in Montana, doing these different things, to not use it for something positive. And so, yes, I love wild horses. Obviously, I love the nature, but the reality is there's a lot of horses in domestication. There's a lot of horses in conditions where sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not so great, but they all need someone to speak for them, in my point of view, about who they are, what they're born, what their natural instincts are, what is behavioral genetic stamping, what is behavioral stamping in breeding, how does that work? Well, I can help you with that. Or, how do you match, in breeding, like how do you match sensory strengths and sensory vulnerabilities in the mare and stallion so that you don't breed a progeny with a whole boatload of weaknesses, a great body, right? But we're not looking at runway models here. This is not a picture. When people send me, I love all horses. And people say, well, what's your favorite, breed? Well, the horse, I love them all. If you're going to put me in a corner, I think thoroughbreds and Mustangs and Morgans are probably some of my, personal loves, but I love them all. I work with all of them. But, for me, it's really about representing, who they are and how I can help you fit them into what you're doing, because they're going to be there, right? We're not going to erase the industries. And for me to draw a hard line in the sand and pull a hard stop and says, well, I'm not working in racing because I don't like some of the practices. I'm not working in dressage because I don't like some of the practices. To me, I'm abandoning the horses that are there. I'm abandoning them. And couldn't, I couldn't live with myself. I would just leave the industry completely, if I was to do that. And for me, I've started over many, many times. Like I said, I've been certainly willing to risk it all. So I started completely over and went back to zero to immerse myself in the sporting industries and disciplines to learn all I could. And then I did pretty well at that over time, a long time. It took me all around the world. If I can't believe some of the places I've been and some of the things I've been able to do. My career has taken me from, the mountains of out around the Bighorn to, the mountains in Australia and the snowy mountains to the Middle East. I went to Amman, Jordan to work with the king's horses there in the World Stable, the Arabians and the Arabian show horses, and then the Arabian endurance horses, and their breeding program and full evaluation. And I, worked in Doha, Qatar, with the Sheikhs and with their horse programs in England and all across Europe and Australia. And if you would have told me that this was going to happen when I started out, it's just, pinch me because I wouldn't have believed it. For me, I'm all about, I believe that, the first step in realizing your dreams is believing that you can, and I think that that's a big thing. And also I always say, for myself, I remind myself that, you take one grain of sand and you turn it into your own beach. That's all you need. You're the only person who has to believe in this. And I made myself a promise that I would continue to keep learning and about the horses and how I could help them and help their owners and their riders and their trainers and the different industries to create better environments for them that fit them. Better is a relative term. Better for who? Everything has to fit to the individual. Everything has to fit to the individual. There's no cookie cutter type of thing. And then over the last couple of years, I mean, I was with my first partner, Tanya. She and I were together for 23 years of all this. And, I almost, if I start crying, it's okay because I'm a very emotional person. But she passed away. We were together for 23 years and she passed away at the age of 52, just turned 52, of breast cancer that went to her brain. And so my father passed away in 2002 of cancer. And so I helped take care of him with my mom, my brother. And that was a hard thing to be there when he took his last breath, and I never, the pain of my mom screaming out, they were together since they were 14. And that's just something that you just, never forget. And it was, unfortunately, Tanya then years later had breast cancer. And then we thought we had it, but then it ended up going into her brain. Before we knew it, she had 5 tumors in her brain. And, she collapsed at her work. And, you had that sick feeling when you get a call and says, Tanya's in a hospital. And so anyway, brought her home and the doctor gave her 6 months to live and she made it 5. And it was, I'll never forget that moment because, I was getting ready to go to a horse sale and I was asked to go to, it was in September, and I was asked to go to the September Keeneland sale. And I had gone there for every year for that sale. I mean, the stallion of the horse that's in the Derby, a horse named So Happy, is the son of a stallion sire, Run Happy. Well, Run Happy was a horse that I picked out as a yearling in 2013 at Keeneland. So I have a tie to So Happy and his characteristics. And his owners are good friends of mine. And of course, I'm pulling for him for, my own personal reasons. But I determined that, well, times like, oh, you can still go to the sale, but it just pulls the wind, out of your ship. So I didn't, and I stayed home, and I'm glad I did. And I pretty much walked away from the horse industry, and it was a tough road to watch someone go down. And not to be morbid, but it just changed me to the point where I almost quit the industry because when she passed, it was at a point where I took care of her 24/7 by myself. I had no help. And so she passed away here at the house on the couch, and it was just horrific. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to, I didn't have the passion anymore for I was like, I just didn't have passion for life. I mean, I was just like gutted. and also financially completely drained because I took everything to take care of her. Cancer's not cheap, and homes are not cheap, and all that kind of stuff. So everything I had saved and had was gone, and I didn't care. It didn't matter. And I'm alive. I started again, whatever. And I was raised a carpenter's son, and so I funded my own work all of my life, my own horse work by pounding nails and wearing a tool belt. My joke is that I can find your horses and I can build your house and your barn too. I did all kinds of different construction. We did bank barns, restorations. I was trained as a master trim carpenter, which I still enjoy doing. It's kind of like my side hustle, and I need a mental break. I'm going to go put some crown molding up someplace. I'd like to do that. I still have all the tools in the shop. And I just decided that, the horses, but it was so hard to walk away. It was just like, it was the only thing that kept me sane, along the way. I was like, I still have so much I want to do, so much I want to learn. I still have so much to learn. There's so much more out there. And I just didn't know if I had it in me to do it. And I took some time away. And a year later, I met my now beautiful wife, Daphne. And, I've been with Tanya for so long that I didn't want another partner, really. And she told me, one of our last conversations that she says, I'm going to send you someone and you're just going to know it because, you have a lot of life to live. And she was very noble and very just so brave braver than I was trying to hold it together, for her. It's kind of sometimes how that goes, I think. And when I met my Daphne, I knew immediately. I said, Tanya, you did it. And I found my second wind. And I met Daphne, and she's like, "You're not giving up. We'll do whatever it takes. You're getting back in the game. You've worked too hard, too long. There's no way Tanya would ever want you to quit this." And she stuck with you through all those ups and downs, and you didn't have two pennies to rub together, and you guys you went through all that to get to here. And yes, you may have lost it all, but look at all you've gained along the way. Look at all the experiences you've learned. And I realized something that I've always been a caregiver by nature, and so I've been caregiving for a long time. 2 days after Tanya passed away, my mom fell and became paralyzed. So I'm in the hospital with my mom, making funeral arrangements for Tanya. And so that was another thing to just weigh you down. But looking back on it, I realized that my work with horses has taught me how to be a better caregiver. And being a caregiver taught me how to can't say that 8 times in a row, taught me how to be a better horse person, right? Taught me how to read the environment, read intentions, listen, not let your eyes fool you, go by your instincts, follow your instincts. And the biggest message I give the young folks is don't be afraid to put this down and feel the world around you. Don't just see it, feel it. When I'm coaching riders, and I know we're all over the place with this webinar, but I'm having fun. So, but don't be afraid to close your eyes when you're in the saddle. Feel your horse, right? Feel what's happening around you, and then you get to learn to use your sensory system in a different way, like your horses do. You won't be over reliant on one thing, right? Take in the whole world through a different sensory aspect. And now do your spatial awareness, do your self-awareness, and don't rely upon your eyes. And then open your eyes and learn to see things differently, And so caregiving and working with horses, for me, they have worked hand in hand. And I still obviously caregive for my mom. And so those two things have taught me a lot about each other. But it's about life. My work with horses, when I'm working with young horses, regardless of the discipline, one of the things I do is I put together sensory enrichment diagrams, things that people can do in their arena using poles and cones that are sensory enrichment, not just random things, and not for physical work, for psychological work. How to teach them how to do the all-important sensory lead change, which we didn't talk about, but we're going to have to now because I brought it up. We all know what a physical lead change is, right? Well, horses also make sensory lead changes. That is when something in the environment goes from one sensory aspect to another, right? It changes. It goes around them, or they go around it or into it. Things are happening, right? So it has to change. And around the horse's body, there are 6 zones of sensory aspects. There's six sensory aspects. There's the forward aspect. There's a map so I can't even begin to do it by hand signals. If you go to the learning library on my website and you go to the glossary, there'll be a map in there, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. There's a sensory map in there. But the horse's psychology, their sensory system, and their awareness of the environment is broken into 6 different compartments. So they are a jigsaw puzzle piece, quite literally a jigsaw puzzle piece. And that is meant to fit in. When you see that map, you realize how they are meant to fit within the herd matrix. And so some parts of the aspects are stronger than others. This is where the strengths and vulnerabilities come into play, right? So that it has a unique shape. And so we have to understand what that shape is. And we have to realize that, when you approach your horse, you touch your horse emotionally long before you touch your horse physically. And you want to make sure that you understand where that threshold is and where it is in that sensory aspect, because it's not going to be the same in every point around the horse. So we need to know what this puzzle piece looks like, because for a horse, they're much bigger than their body as far as you coming into their space. So it's like when you just rush in, I did a webinar on the psychology of saddle fitting. And one of the things we're talking about is, identifying where the horse says, you're right next to me. You might be 5 meters away, but you're right next to me. You're pushing me away. You're right next to me. You're that close. Because, it's really important. Another part, there's a lot of important things we can talk about. Why that's important is because horses, from a sensory standpoint, things are closer to them than they are to us. So let me ask, I'll give it to you this way. So if it takes us 35, if a fence post, we're in a pasture and we're going to the gate, okay, and we're walking to that gate at a normal speed, and let's say it's 35. I'm still using meters because I was in Australia, so I'm going to stay with meters. So we're 35 meters away, and it takes me, I don't know. I'm going to say hypothetically, let's say it takes me, 28 seconds to walk there, right, to cover that distance at a walk. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. Well, for your horse, it'll take them 22 seconds to cover the same distance. So therefore, that object is that many seconds closer to them in interpretation. So horses do not measure distance in feet. Distance is measured in time. How much time? It is time. So they don't measure things in feet, they measure things in time. So that's why a horse will overreact to something that seemed to be way over here, but it's closer to them than it is to us. And so I'm going to get away from it long before we get there, hence the jump, right? Because it's actually closer. So when you're in saddle and when you're walking with your horse, you need to make sure that you're clearing space further ahead than what you think you should be. Because for the horse, if you're focused 10 meters away, that 10 meters away is 5 meters away for your horse. So that's why they'll begin to react to things before you even get to them, because they're already there in so many ways in their psychology. And if they can't interpret it, it becomes a block. So we want to be the bridge and not the block. So if it's a block, you're like, whoa, self-preservation kicks in. Who are you? Because when a horse is in that survey mode, that first step of the sensory sequence, you don't exist. Keep that in mind. When your horse is looking out and all the senses are trying to orient, they're still in survey, they're pinballing back and forth between those two things, self-awareness is not there. You can be walking your horse and all of a sudden stop and they can look out, and people get run over, they get turned into, because your horse doesn't know you're there anymore. When a horse loses that type of focus, they have to reacquire their environment. They have to reacquire it. And so when we're riding a horse and they're constantly bouncing around, you're riding your horse and the body's doing one direction and their mind's in someplace else. That's the mind over here trying to figure out what's happening. And well, crap, you're supposed to go straight. So we're trying to steer. They're way over here, those kind of things. So there's a gap there. And so we have to determine what that is, how efficient it is. And I always tell folks, when you're in saddle, when you're working with your horse, realize that you need to be helping them clear space. Learn to lose your peripheral. One of the things that we do in our clinics and in my private coaching is that I teach people their own sight lines. You need to learn how to use your sensory system in more like a horse would use theirs. We have to have different sight lines using your peripheral vision, making corners straight lines, because horses see the world, basically in a circle for all intents and purposes. So we have to mimic that. We have to be able to mimic that. A turn for a horse is actually a straight line, because if all my senses are over here, basically my body's turning, but I'm looking at it and I'm interpreting it in a straight line. So we have to, do the same thing. We have to change our perception and learn to use our senses in a different way. And it's always fun doing a clinic, because the first obstacle course I design is for the people, because we need to learn how to use our sensory system and our sight lines to interpret things, a little bit more efficiently to match our horse's cadence. And one more thing before I lose my voice for tonight, and it's been a long day for me, is that it's really important to make sure that you stay on beat with your horse. Okay, so what does that mean? I'll just give you a jumping example. You'll see pictures of a horse coming over a jump, and the horse is looking, one way, but the person is already looking for the next jump. They're in air. You're in the air. You're looking for where you're going. Not a good place to be. When a horse's hooves hit the ground, it's a sensory reset, right? So it's a sensory reset. So when a horse's feet hit the ground, their psychology is in rhythm. So if their feet are hitting the ground this way, boom, you're in that cadence. The psychology is also the sensory system is in the same cadence. Boom. That's how it stays in harmony. If a horse gets bumpy, it's out of cadence. Something's out of cadence, right? So something's not in harmony. It's like a musical instrument. If it's tuned, it has a nice flow to it, right? Good rhythm, things like that. If it's not, you're going to have bumps along the way. I call them potholes in the road. So it's important to know that when you're picking your sight points and your targets in space to go to always move your focus when the horse's hooves hit the ground on the comeback. Don't do it before. So if you're jumping, don't look over here before the horse's hooves hit the ground, because you can interrupt the communication. You can put static in the line of communication, because I am here. I'm trying to refine the environment. You're already over here. So you're basically putting your focus over here, and I'm trying to find you. I'm hitting the ground. So when you hit the ground, then you change your focus. So go over a jump, when the horse's hooves hit the ground, then you can look to your next target, but not until. Try to keep it within. So as you'll throw them out of sequence, it's all about finding, again, the harmony and contentment, finding that rhythm and finding that balance. And when you do that, you unlock little bits of strengths, and you override the little bits of vulnerabilities. And that's when you begin to enrich and nurture your athlete. And that's when you begin to really have good communication. And after a while, you'll do it naturally. Like every obstacle I put in the arena is based upon natural cadence. So if I'm giving a horse to go over some rails at trot pole distance, I'm going to mark your sight lines. I'm going to measure the trot pole distance, but it may be 50 meters or so away from where you are, but I'm going to put markers in the arena that actually match the horse's cadence, so that when you're looking here, you're on cadence, even though it's further away. And what you do is you begin to learn. By nature, you begin to learn to identify it and to identify your markers in space. And that keeps us from becoming complacent. Because the worst thing that we can do for our horses is to do physical exercises without purpose. They have to have purpose. They need purpose. Don't just put me out here and warm me up without warming up my psychology. Because guess what? You're worrying about fixing your stirrups and your saddle, and I got to fix the girth. How's my seat? All this time, your horse is wandering around, and they're like, well, you're not even here. I'm going to find my own purpose. And it may not be what you want it to be. But guess what? You lost me, right? You got to work to get me back, and that kind of thing. So there is no such thing as non-purposeful exercise, physical exercise. You always want to give your horse a purpose to their motion, because non-purposeful motion is not training. it can be physical training. I'll give you that, but it certainly is not training, and it's not translatable to the performance. So, and on that note, I'm running out of steam. uh, but yes, my days usually start around 5 in the morning and end at so I'm full throttle all day between work and caregiving. So I'm nonstop. And then as soon as when I stop, it's like boop, feet up, hat comes off. Carries disconnected. So, but I hope you enjoyed the talk. And I know we covered all kinds of different ground, but there's just so many different things that we can hyper focus on, and we can going forward we can certainly pick a particular subject and streamline it. But I wanted to give you kind of a broad-based overview of how I blend the natural herd dynamics into the domesticated world in the high intensity, high pressure disciplines that I operate in. I operate in some really high, dense pressure cookers, and I had the personality for it. But I'm happy to be in there because again, like I said, there's horses in there, and there's a lot of really good people in every discipline, and they're working hard to make a positive difference. So, one more thing I wanted to add is that over the last year and a half, I have really gotten into education. I've realized that equine welfare and risk advisory, things like that, really comes down to education in so many ways. So I've become very determined to go around the world and teach, lecture, give clinics, presentations on all these different things, because I think it's really important to go to get this information into the educational lexicon. We in our industry, I find it a little bit amusing in some ways because, not in a great way, but in so many industries we have to do a study to get a driver's permit. You have to pass a test to have a food license, handling license, and just all these different things. But when it comes to horses, there's really no foundational basic education to help people understand herd dynamics, sensory soundness, that it even exists. Not only does it exist, but how it functions, what it does, what it means to you and to your horse. So, for me, education is the biggest part of welfare. We can talk about welfare till we're blue in the face, but without education, it's just talk, and it's one of these things that makes us feel good. Discipline should be built around welfare. Welfare shouldn't come in as a rescue to the discipline. And so, on my website, I invite everyone to visit a couple key areas. If you go to resources, you'll see a blog section there, and I've written several recent position papers that I think you might find interesting. A lot of it's on welfare, some of it's on breeding. I think you'll find some of those papers very interesting. And the other part, of course, is our learning library. My wife and I work really hard. My wife, I should say. I write the content, and she does all the magic to make it look pretty, because I'm not pretty. But the learning library is something that we are really passionate about, because it's a place where I can offer as much free information as possible. Some things are for purchase because we're trying to support the learning library, but we just released. I like reaching the kids, the youth. So we just launched, after a lot of work, and we're still working on it, but we just launched Think Like Tink. And please check out Think Like Tink, because it is our youth education area. And it's all about teaching the kids to see things from the horse's point of view, so that they understand at an early age that horsemanship is not about that ribbon. Horsemanship is not the pretty saddle. It's not the Ariat boots. It's something completely different than that. And until they can understand, and it's not their fault, but they need a way to understand that all these things are there, who the horses are. They need to understand the operating system running the machine in a fun way. That so that's what Think Like Tink is. So Tink is our mascot, and we're really excited. One of the first stories on the Think Like Tink page is "Does my horse like me?" And it's a really neat little story. Our goal is, we have several things on there right now, story wise, but our goal is to work to have an interactive educational game and create an app for it and give, that's the world we live in. So why not create a game that is functional, that is a teaching tool about herd, into the horse psychology and then animation film shorts and adventures from the trail with Tink, and those kind of things. And we have a lot of high hopes and a lot of and we have some support for that. I was talking about the horse So Happy. His owners, Anna and Hans Marin, are their racing program. They are stewards of the Learning Library, so they're our first stewards, and they have helped bring this together. So we're always welcoming new stewards who want to be part of the educational future. But so anyhow, visit Think Like Tink and visit the Learning Library. And if you have any kids, and you'll enjoy it as well, because we did a trail words. So I took the glossary and turned it into a youth version in a way, but I did it in a way that was spoken from the horse. How would a horse describe these things? So Tink is the horse. He's the mascot. So what does this mean to him? And so Tink explains these terms and what they mean to Tink, and then gives the kids if this was happening to you, what would you feel? I think things like that, different scenarios. So anyhow, we're really excited by it, as you can tell. And it's become a big passion of mine to really continue working in the different disciplines, obviously as a coach and evaluator, but also working in welfare. I've been able to speak internationally at several high global forums on equine welfare in my work, from Portugal to Ireland to India, and around the world. So that's a sign to me that things are moving in that direction, and I'm very proud and honored to be a spokesperson for that. And I think my willingness to immerse myself in the different disciplines has lent me credibility in those different disciplines, because I work at everything from the Olympic level to the 4-H club down the street. And so I understand their what they're going through and what they're trying to do to survive. So I understand the dynamics of the different discipline, and helping them fit the horse into it properly, and more comfortably is my goal. So it's a lot of hard work, but dang it, I'm going to continue on until I roll off the table. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for every second of this. This was so wonderful. And
Question.
Yeah.
Quick clarification. Did early on, and I should have interrupted early on, you had said a sentence somewhere along the lines of emotional cues precede physical cues.
Yeah, so let me talk about that, because this will be important for you in training your horses. So our intentions emotional intention precedes physical action. So your intentions will precede yourself in the saddle. It'll change subtly your pressure points. That is where the horses actually communicate with, is your intentions. It is your intent before the action. So as long as you keep your intent ahead of your physical action, and then they'll respond.
They'll read
to your
into
intention. Yes, they'll respond. So it's the same. So I'll give you an example that you'll certainly understand and probably already know. But how information is delivered affects how that information is received. So you can walk up to someone and say, "Hey, we got this truck coming in. We got hay coming in. We got the clock ticking. We got to get out of here by so and so time." And it's like, "Get your team off their butt and let's get this truck unloaded." And then I walk away. So it's like, wow, right? So now you have all this emotional inflection on top of the message, on top of what you're asking me to do, but you've hit me with this emotional, like hardcore stuff. Like, man, you've tainted the message. So my performance and my execution, my response is also going to be carried over in that way. It's very likely that it can be that way. We have to remember that horses do not have the intellect of reason. They have the intellect that stops at association. So they're not reasoning the fact that I understand that you had bad news before you came to the barn, or that your truck broke down and that you're running late and that you have to get someplace. I can reason that out, and then I can accept the way you presented the information, because I can reason away why it happened, and I can reason the outcome. I am not doing that as a horse. All I know is like, this crazy, individual came at me with all this, like all this emotion, all this physical stuff with the message. And all I know is it made me feel like you brought all kinds of intensity, emotion with that. And so that's going to affect my performance, right? That's going to affect how that information is interpreted. The same message, as opposed to I walk up to you and say, yeah, I know it's getting late in the day. A truck just came in. I know everybody wants to go home, but we really need to get this thing unloaded, and then we'll go grab a beer afterwards. No problem. You know what? Because you asked me nicely, I'm going to bust my butt because I'm going to be like, you know what? Every time you ask me for something, you do it in a way that is polite, and you do it. So leadership is not a physical action. Leadership is an emotional intention. Leadership is emotional. It's not physical. And so, true leaders have a strong emotional intent that's very positive. And so it's leadership. That's how horses respond to that way. Horses prefer shared leadership. Especially the horses higher up on the totem pole. They, lead horse psychology. They don't want to be controlled. I'll fight you on that because now you're making me feel unsafe. I will share the leadership with you. Sometimes I'll lead, sometimes you'll lead, sometimes I'll lead, sometimes you'll lead. But we have to know how to find that ebb and flow. The lower you go down on a totem pole, you have to be a little bit more leadership, but you also have to be careful in how you do it because now, you can cause issues. Who's messaging me? Oh, I'm sorry. And my mom's like, "Are you coming out?" And I said, "Yes, I am coming out." But intention, your intention. So again, it goes back to like horses will respond. You'll have a better chance of getting a purposeful response from an intention, and you'll get a reaction from a physical cue. They'll react to physical, they'll respond to intention. Intention that precedes physical. And then that way you always keep yourself in check. It's a way to maintain your accountability, not just for the environment that you're creating physically, but the environment that we create mentally. We are accountable for that emotional environment. If we want to actually fit in with our herd, we're not going to do it in a physical way. It's going to be a psychological, it's going to be an emotional fit, and that kind of thing. So like the greatest feeling you're ever going to have is Adam, the best feeling you're going to ever have is when a horse's physical movement is running through your emotional intention. When their movement is running through your intention, that is absolute beauty. That is beauty because now you're working in harmony and contentment, and they'll go through a fire for you, right? They'll try that jump. They'll go across that river. They will go through a scary spot because you got me. You got me. I can check in with you and you're there. You're present. If you don't do that, you can be on their back, you can be in their space, but being present is different. You can be there. It's just like I can be in a room with somebody, but I can't even talk to you. I don't even feel like you're present. I can't bring my concerns to you or things like that. It's communication. That's why horses are so good at teaching us. They're so good at, I do leadership programs for companies and corporations, and it's so vital that what they teach us. So again, I went on to another tangent. Sorry about that, Adam. But
No, it tied in perfectly. Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Totally,
I do my best. Yeah, I apologize. I'm not a pro at this. I'm just a guy doing his thing.
Thank you.
Yep, my pleasure.
I hope you will allow us to have you back again for like 3 hours.
Yeah, no worries. And I promise, if you have me back, Bruce, I'll stay on target. We'll pick a
Yes.
topic. But like I said, for me, I just wanted to kind of give a review of it's really hard to quantify. Well, 57. So we'll just say years of work, many years of work into a small window of time. But I wanted to give you kind of the cross section to see my journey because I've had the pleasure of working with Hollywood stars, A-list actors and actresses on being around horses for movies and just many things. I've signed a lot of non-disclosure agreements along the way, but it's been absolutely fascinating. I feel so blessed for the journey I've been on and so lucky. But also, I've worked really, really hard. to be here to do this. And I continue to work very hard because, the horse industry, you're always walking a tightrope between completely broke and paying your bills next month. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a tightrope, but it's a tightrope that, that stress of just trying to survive to me is just, it's worth it. I
Oh
just
yeah.
tolerate it because I feel like, man, if I can just help this horse, if I can just help this person, if I can just help this young, new rider, and the response to Think Like Tink is very exciting. And, to me, it's like, wow, okay, if we can just go further upstream, take this information to the
Yeah.
breeding shed so we have better, smarter decisions in all different industries. And then also bring this information to the younger riders because sometimes it's hard to train to coach someone who's been, this is how we do it. This is how I've always done it. Yes, I understand that. But I learned a lot of things that I thought were right too. Like I would go to horse sales and Bruce, I would say I go to a horse sale and I'm like, I know this horse, I know these characteristics, this is what this horse needs. And then the horse lays a complete egg, right? I'm
Yep.
like,
Yep.
what did I felt horrible. I felt like I did a disservice to the horse. I did my best at the moment. But you go back and in my database, I have well over 10,000 horses that I've studied that I cracked through the years to determine this was important for this. This was important for this. This was not important for this, and I thought it was. This reaction did not mean this, and I thought it did. This did not translate to this as a yearling to a 3-year-old. So and then I backtrack and I've done that back and forth and this like, this detective work for all these years to find this little nugget of truth, this little nugget of truth and this little nugget of truth. And then I take those nuggets of truth and say, I can help you. This is what we're looking for. And, I'm really proud of the fact that I can say I've had Kentucky Derby winners, I have Breeders' Cup champions, I have Olympic horses under my belt, I have 5-star adventures, and I have found beautiful horses for the little girl down the street who just wanted to go riding. Therapy horses. What does a horse need to be a safe therapy horse? Well, is it going to be a physical therapy horse? Was it going to be an emotional therapy horse? There's all things relative to this, and the herd dynamics and the sensory soundness plays a role in every single thing that the horse does. So I can't stop. I still have a lot more to learn and a lot more I want to share.
Obviously, we can see that you have a whole lot to share, and we want to hear it all. What is your book?
So my book is, oh, thank you for asking. I oftentimes forget that.
No, we're not letting you forget that because I
No, no. So my book is called Herd Wired in Pursuit of Discovery. I don't have a copy with me, but that's my fault. But it's a field companion. When I first started to write the book, and we published it last summer. When I first started to write this book, I had this volume of information. I'm like, there's no way on earth anybody, including me, is going to want to pick up that book. I don't care how much good information is in there and open it. I can't give you the Gone with the Wind. You're right. I can't give you the Thornbirds. Like I can't give you these real thick books. It's not going to reach anybody. So I had to check myself, and I'm like, well, I can write 12 volumes. That's not going to work. I'm going to be dead before I get them all finished. So I figured, well, all right, I like nostalgia. So I like creating things that make you feel like it's been around for a long time. Like I wanted to create something that made it feel like you went to an old ranger station and you went into a trunk and you found their notebook, right? It was weathered, it was worn, it had all kinds of cool information in it, and you felt like it was part of the environment, part of you, part of your DNA, and you couldn't understand how. So once I determined that, I created Herd Wired in Pursuit of Discovery, and I created a field companion. And instead of giving you everything in a whole bunch of words, I give you the best bits, in a field companion that you can relate to. That my hope was, you always take a risk. Like, how do I describe this to help it make sense? How can I do this? And so I went through very meticulously and wrote it. And at first I was like, it felt pretty good, but it was missing a few things. So you go back and you do it. And then I hit that moment like, okay, I would pick this book up. Okay, because I'm my own worst enemy. I'm my own worst critic. And yes, is it perfect? Of course not. Is anything? No. But you know what? I'm very happy with it, and I'm very flattered that soon after it was published, It started to, expand. It's now translated in Dutch and selling throughout Europe. It's going to be translated into Chinese, and it's going to be distributed shortly in India, and probably maybe translated in Hindu as well. So it has slowly, it's a grassroots thing. We did our own. My poor wife. So I had four different publishers interested in publishing the book, but they were going to take, how many months. They wanted some control. I'm like, you know what? This is
No.
my life's work.
Yeah.
So I said to my wife, how do you feel about making your own imprint? And so she was like, okay. She's game for anything. And
Yes.
so went through the whole thing, and now I have Beyond the Hoof Bookworks, which is our own imprint for my books, and she also wrote a children's book that we have published there. So yeah, we have our own imprint, and that takes a long time to learn the navigation of all the distribution ecosystem, and I do everything the hard way. But you know what? I'd rather make it worth it because I want to understand my audience. I want to understand the nuts and bolts of everything. I don't want to just turn the TV on. I want to take the back off and understand how it works. Because how in the world, how can I teach you? How can I share with you if I don't do the work behind the scenes? You're going to see right through it, right? It's just
Yep.
Because if you don't put the time in, don't tell me bullcrap. There's enough of that out there. There's enough spam coming at you, right? So take the time. I'm 57. That took a lot of time to get here, and I at 67, I want to be better than I am today. And that's my goal, is to be better tomorrow, because it's not for myself, but for the horses, and to help the industries become better, become more accountable. And now with the focus on welfare, I just wrote a position paper, the most recent one. I think you'll really enjoy probably the most, on welfare, because I talk about welfare is not if we don't talk about who the horse is, the psychological part of the horse, we can't pretend to talk about welfare, because welfare, is welfare is the right equipment, the proper use of physical equipment, but welfare doesn't start there. Welfare starts with the accountability for the emotional part of the horse, being accountable for that. That's where welfare starts, and that's where I feel like this information really needs to be put out there into that. So maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew, but I'll go down swinging. I'll tell you that. I'll go down swinging.
Keep on biting, buddy. Keep biting.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, everyone.
Bruce,
Because I'm sorry.
now you can come in. Bruce can come for 3 days now to Kentucky and watch you.
Are you coming in, Bruce?
Sounds like it.
Is.
Sounds like
Awesome.
that might be coming.
Well, I think it's been predetermined that we're going to get you there.
Well, if we do, we're gonna have to spend a lot of evenings together talking, because I've got all kinds of questions to ask you, and I don't even know which to ask first.
Well,
Okay,
I have to just remember that I like Cabernet Sauvignon. I like Pinot Noir and a good red blend. And my wife likes Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio. So if you can remember those things, you can have our attention for as long as you like.
Well, we're going to be in Kentucky. Is no bourbon in that at all?
Well, there is.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
It's going to be hosted, the Winnie Awards, where your book will be, is going to be hosted at the Equus Run Vineyard.
That's awesome. That's exciting.
Yeah. So
Well,
you'll have plenty of wine.
How fitting. Yes. Yep.
All right.
Well,
Well, good
this is
night.
done.
We appreciate everything that you've.
Any other
Okay.
questions?
Yeah. Any more?
My hour is up.
It's long been up, so we.